Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking Podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Sarah Wilson is a horticulturist and host of the Roots and All podcast, which provides honest and practical information and brings together some of the best known experts in the world of horticulture. Sarah is known for her low impact on wildlife gardens. Her designs focus on wildlife and environmental benefits without compromising on aesthetic style. I talked to Sarah during the lockdown in 2020. In this episode, we discovered the two schools of thought in garden design, why your garden should be a haven for wildlife, the importance of getting the structure right before selecting plants and designing a garden that you can manage, and why you should definitely think twice before you cut down a tree.
I think garden design projects, the interior designers are very much at the mercy of their clients and other contractors. So sometimes things sound like a good idea. We try and do an initial meeting and things, and then something gets in the way.
My perspective on that, I suppose, is that from an interior design point of view, you think, it'd be brilliant to run the design concept out into the garden. But as you get through those patio doors, that's when the money seems to run out.
Yes, I think that would fit with my experience, which is that the interior gets done and then a year later we are called in to mop up the mess that is left outside after building works, or that was the inherited mess, that kind of thing. So yes, that definitely stacks up.
Well, it's good if you get the opportunity, but what kind of mess do you have to deal with when you come back to a property?
Generally, it is building rubbish. Things have been left behind. Not so much big stuff normally. It's more little pieces have kind of got into the soil. There might be a lot of small debris. There is probably some soil compaction, a bit of a quagmire. Things have probably been left. Plants might have been hacked back so that they're no longer looking their best is probably an understatement. Turf's been, roots have been damaged, or trees have been damaged. What we're dealing with.
That sounds awful.
It is pretty crap. I think historically gardens have been used as dumping grounds. There is a lot of builders' rubble in your average garden, and homeowners as well have kind of caused trouble too. They've buried things like you often find greenhouses. One of my gardens is that I go to regularly used to be inhabited by a doctor in the Victorian times, and we find the most bizarre things. So loads and loads of small bottles and pieces of ceramics, but even things like a horse's tooth I've dug up from there. So God only knows what went on.
That's quite. We often think about how to deal with the history of the building. That's the whole history of the garden right in front of you there.
I feel like the time team sometimes.
I wanted to talk about garden design and how interior designers and architects more effectively work with garden designers. I think there's an inherent problem with projects, isn't there, that they often don't get teamed up together. But when you're working independently, how do you approach the projects of creating a space for a client?
Everyone is different. Sometimes I will come up with a concept that's really, tight and starts off quite abstract, but occasionally there just isn't the creative flexibility in the job to do that. So it would be more a case of channeling the client and their needs, and kind of probably bouncing off the interior space. Actually, if somebody doesn't want to go through the whole process of me drawing out what what their garden means to them and what it should look like, sometimes I will just go in and kind of read a space and read them and apply that to the outdoor space. So I suppose it's horses for courses. Is it the same sort of thing with you?
I approached the interiors from the practical side of things to start with, really, because it's often about reshaping space and trying to understand how people want to live. And that's a kind of sculptural exercise of moving spaces around and providing the functionality. And then the look and feel of it often comes from what the clients are interested in, and I've never been a one to impose an aesthetic on people. I'd like to sort of try and understand what they're coming to the project thinking they want to try and achieve. And often that's quite clear in terms of aesthetics and materials and look and feel, I suppose. And I guess that might be the same for gardens, is it? Or do people have the same understanding of the possibilities of gardening? Because certainly in interiors, clients will come with a whole load of tear sheets or Pinterest board of stuff they like, and a real understanding of what those components are. But is it the same in the garden field?
I think you get two very distinct schools of garden design as I see it. So you have the people who work like you and more like me and try to channel what the client wants. And then you do have people who will have a very set aesthetic and they will come in and they will impose that upon the space. That's probably, in a way, an easier way to work, because if I'm known for doing urban gardens with pleached trees and porcelain paving, I will have that all over my website. That will be my portfolio, and someone can come to me and know exactly what they're getting. And quite often I will have clients come to me with a picture of a space like that and say, I want that. Whereas for me, I find it more rewarding to work with clients who say, well, I know that I like to be outdoors and I want to use the space and I want to sit here on the patio and I like these plants. And so it's better for me to kind of channel what they want, rather than just giving them a bit of a identikit kind of garden and working from that. But yeah, there's definitely different sorts of things. I mean, how do you deal with clients who come to you with a Pinterest board and say, I want that?
It's a good question, actually. I suppose if it's not out of the ordinary, or it could make a really positive contribution to the design, then it's great, because that takes out one of the things to think about. You've already got a lead from the client, and then it's about shaping the space to support that. So I really enjoy it, actually, when clients have got a very strong idea of what they're after, because then you can really hone in on that and make it work. And I think it's making it work really well that sets good design apart, because they've got a really clear idea of the look and feel and what the space needs, how the space needs to perform. So it's making it work, fitting it into the space, getting the access and movement through the building, and then applying the palette of materials that they like. And again, it's not really, I never want to say you've got to have this color, or you must have a certain material, because I'm just not precious enough about it. I just think that's their house, so it's great when they come with that much information. The more the better, really, because then that really helps you focus.
Have you ever had a client come to you with a preconceived idea and say, I want that, and you've gone, I just can't work with that because it's so alien to my likes and style?
Not yet. I've had some clients that have, I think most clients come to me because they sort of know roughly what they're going to get, because we did become known for a certain look and, an approach to how we shape space. And you attract the customers that want that sort of repetition, and they all have a slightly different take on it. I did have one client years ago who did buy some lights that I thought, they're not really for me. But then I thought, well, they aren't for me, so I'll just let them get on with it. If they're happy, And we've created the space to support that expression of their own personality. That's the important thing, I think, is to be able to allow people to express their personality. Whether you like the designs that they want is none of my business, really, I suppose. It's providing it all works for them. Yeah, but normally we can sort of work out whether the clients are right for us before we get engaged in the process, because they're naturally aligning to us because of what they've seen us do before, so touch wood, we haven't had a problem with that. But in terms of how you're developing those ideas, then you're working from matching the space to how they want to use it, and then pulling in planting that's must be appropriate for the location in terms of the type of soil and the climate, but also links in with, the idea of plants as parts of concepts. How does that work? And, are there different plants that work with different types of concepts?
Yes, I suppose there are things that naturally gravitate towards a concept. So if I was doing a really clean, kind of sleek, industrial looking space, that could align more with architectural plants, but it could also work with because of the contrast with lots of kind of frothy plants. It possibly wouldn't work with, I don't know, plucking something out of the air, a load of bedding. So yes, I suppose there are sort of rules that underpin a lot of design, but then obviously rules are always there to be broken. But the plants generally are the last thing that get brought into it. It's much more working on the look and feel. So it's much more about moving around the space and the actual structure of the space. And then the plants, really, I try and leave right until the end, because I love plants so much. Otherwise, I would just design a garden full of plants and there would be no coherence. It would just be, I love that, I love that, I love that. That's got to go in. So I have to be careful that I don't bring the plants into the design stage too early, because it can be confusing. That said, there's probably at the back of my mind usually a sort of style that I would have, that I was bearing in mind.
So you're dealing with the actual space then before it's almost a bit like dealing with the space and then decorating it internally. It's a similar approach to creating that space with an idea of what it's going to look like, but then deciding on the final finishes further towards the end, once you've worked out the practicalities of it.
I would say so. You might have, again, you'll have an abstract idea of what's there. So, I might think, okay, I need to screen that area, so I am going to have an evergreen block. But as to what that block will actually be, that would come further down the line.
Yeah. And is there a kind of overarching concepts that you like to put into your spaces then, or things that are common themes that you maybe are part of your signature?
My business partner and I are known for doing wildlife gardens and low impact gardens. So we would definitely, shy away from putting all hard landscaping in, or, that's kind of what we are known for. But in terms of how you can apply that, you can apply it in lots of different ways. So you can have that formal, you can have that informal. So it's more about, again, I suppose it's like matching with clients. You know when you're going to work with a client because your underlying values will match theirs probably. And the same thing for gardens. It's about having the values that underpin something that then play in with all the other variables. I was thinking about sort of interior design. I don't have a lot of experience working with interior designers, but talking about sort of the style of the garden, I was really intrigued to know, can you design a space that is very much kind of one type of look and feel, and then have that set against a backdrop of a garden that is really not talking to that space in any way? And I was thinking, if you had sort of mid-century modern interiors and then that looked out over a cottage garden, how do you deal with that? Can you deal with that?
I think the aim of any design is to get some sort of consistency and continuity. And if you're designing an interior, one would think that there'd be some relationship with the exterior that would follow through. And the type of spaces, I suppose, that clients are drawn to internally are likely to match in style or ethos or aesthetics the type of external spaces. So it would be a question of trying to marry those up. I think the prime things that I get involved with is trying to establish the option for that relationship, you know, the ability to see the garden or to access it more effectively. Just working with a client whose living spaces are actually on the first floor, and they want to move everything down so they can then access the garden. And I suppose their internal aesthetic decisions will roll out into the garden space. And clever designers would actually probably look internally or externally to see what the keys were. But I think it's creating that opportunity to interact and have a bit of an idea of what's through the space of that door that's important from an interior point of view, with the assumption that the aesthetics are going to be in line with what you see internally. And so I think it's looking at what are the tricks about doing that, you know, and what's beyond that back door, the back window, or what's through the window, you know. So things like framing views, I suppose, would be important. It's managing the transition from the inside to the outside, and to what extent one of them bleeds in either way, you know. So it's things like that. But I suppose to get a real consistency of design, you really need to know what you're doing on either side of the window, don't you? Sort of thing. So working.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Or otherwise, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, we garden designers are always coming in and then following on from the interiors, which I think I would say happens without exception. Just racking my brains thinking back. I mean, and my clients would never say to me, "Could you advise me on the carpet?" But I suspect sometimes your clients will ask you to maybe move that into the exterior area. Am I assuming correctly?
Yeah. So we'll often get asked to you know, go beyond the back wall, if you like, but I would just not know where to start in terms of planting. I mean, other than going to the garden centre, you know, which sounds a bit lame, but yeah, there's the extension of the lifestyle, I suppose, to the outside, and I suppose the classic things would be the decking that runs straight from the door out to the fire pit or the barbecue, and then maybe, depending on the shape of this garden, you've got some beds, raised beds or whatever. Those, I've done those architectural extensions where you're building in bits of kit with planting, but really as a backdrop for someone else's expertise, really, because would have no idea what to put in, other than I would instinctively go for herbs and you know, garden herbs and vegetables, maybe, because I'm into cooking, you know. So, but that's not really very well informed, if you like. Again, normally the money's already run out by the time you've got to the garden, as you've experienced.
Yeah, and actually, I think sometimes, I know obviously when you move into a place you have to have it livable, but quite often we are dealing with houses where, for example, we have to bring all the garden materials through the house. So if it's a terrace house in London, and so the interior has been done up, it's all lovely, and then all of a sudden you have to start traipsing God knows how many tons of stuff through, which is, in a way, sometimes I think it might be better to at least get the structural work done outside before you start doing too much polishing at the inside. But that's me speaking entirely selfishly as a garden designer and someone who works with landscapers. I mean, you know, that it would make sense to get, I suppose, all of the structure in and then do the filling in bits. But it's also difficult with schedules and things. I mean, if I have to work with an interior designer, then we have to make our schedules match on a project, which is not always easy. You know, so I guess there's lots of variables at play. There's no kind of perfect world.
What are the benefits of getting your garden designed properly?
I mean, I think it's actually very, very important. You know, especially now, obviously, with what's been going on, your outdoor space, if you have one, is invaluable. And if you can get it right, you can use it year round, and you can use it for the things that you want to use it for. So it's about considering how you as an individual or a family will want to use that outdoor space. And as you said, if you want to use it for growing veg or herbs, you can do all of these things if you plan it correctly. If you don't, and you're trying to just kind of scrabble along with something that's not fit for purpose, you're really fighting a losing battle. If you can just get the structure right, get everything in the right place, get all the growing conditions correct, then you've got a really good chance of having a garden that you're going to enjoy, rather than that you will see as a millstone, which for a lot of people, sadly, the way their gardens are set up, they're just a pain in the bum. They're just a maintenance burden. So I think it's, as I say, really invaluable at the moment to get the outside space right. I guess kind of from your perspective, how important do your clients see gardens and garden design? Is it something that they're valuing more and more?
Definitely. And I think that, like you say, that being stuck at home all the time, we're starting to value just being able to get outdoors, and having that space out the back or out the front is really important. And I've seen lots of gardening going on in the past few months, round about people putting in veg boxes, but I think it still sort of lags behind that interior space. That's in terms of in people's refurbishment mindset. And also, I think if you're going to do it right, you do need to invest a reasonable amount of money, don't you? It's not something you can just tag on the end of a project and think, right, well, let's go and get some plants, because, it's not just the plants, is it? It's the infrastructure and the preparation as well.
That, for me, is what people are most shocked by. And I would say that's my biggest barrier as a garden designer, is the fact that people have absolutely no idea what gardens cost. So, I get people coming to me, they could have a pocket handkerchief at the tiniest little courtyard space, and for what they want to put in it, it's going to cost them upwards of 10 grand. Like equipment in, that's a cost. If it's, if they've got a hand carry everything through somewhere or through a back alley, that's a cost. There's a cost involved to that. So, everything stacks up, particularly if you're in a town, I would say. Plants at the moment, if you are in the habit of going to look at plants and buying them, you will know that prices of plants have gone absolutely through the roof. So probably take what a garden would have cost you last year, and I would say add another third on, because also building materials are really scarce at the moment. So that is going to be very, very costly. I think people find it hard to realise how long they're going to have to wait for landscapers as well. That's another thing. I don't know what it's like with interiors, but good landscapers are booked up probably 6 months, 10 months, a year in advance. And so it's not a kind of quick option. And as I say, even the tiniest little garden, you are looking at thousands and thousands of pounds to get it done right, depending on what you want put in. And if you want a garden designer, that adds up. There's fees involved in that. I think some people just find it a shock. And like you said, when it's the kind of last bit of the budget, that's the last consideration. The money has pretty much run out. Sometimes people, you'll say to them, well, this is what it's going to cost, and they'll just kind of balk at it because it's such a shock. But it is important, that you kind of get it so that you can manage it moving forward. That's, I think, for me, is the key thing, is having a garden that you can manage, because otherwise you're going to have a miserable time of it. What do you feel about gardens? Is it something that you would like to encourage your clients to kind of engage with more, or are you just happy that you get in first and then kind of we're the afterthought?
Well, I do the job that I'm asked to do, and I think if in an ideal world one would be able to include the garden as part of the space, and sort of insist that it gets designed, but it's viewed as two separate things, although there's a clear relationship between the two, of how they sit next to each other. It'd be great to get a client that would go for it, and I've seen it happen, because then, and just from my own experience of using gardens, it's such a great resource, isn't it, in terms of an extra space. If you manage to harvest some tomatoes or a courgette, there's a great feeling of achievement from doing that. You talk about small gardens, and are there anything you can do for people who haven't got much space or zero space at all?
If you've got zero space, I do know a bit about houseplants because I used to have a shop that sold them. So I would probably encourage people down the houseplant route. And then balconies, perfect spaces, window boxes, they're all great. Again, I sound like such a pessimist, and it's because when I started out gardening about 11, 12 years ago, I used to kill everything, and I know how easy it is to get disheartened if you don't know what you're doing. So you buy these magazines and they have a picture. So I moaned about one on Twitter actually the other day. There was a picture of a herb in a tin can attached to a fence. And I know, as someone now who's learnt the hard way, if I do that to a plant, it will die because the roots will fry. You'll never be able to keep it watered. So the thing that I have to always try and emphasise, and I sound like I'm just, being a downer, is that you have to be realistic. So if you have window boxes, they need watering a lot and they need deadheading. And so I always kind of say sometimes it's better to just, this is a terrible thing to say as a garden designer, sometimes it's better to have nothing or to have an alternative form of ornament if you don't want because it is depressing, it is a bit soul destroying if you keep killing plants, and dead plants don't look nice for anyone. So I think sometimes there's the case to be made that if you don't have the space, and particularly you don't have the time to look after things, then actually don't worry about it. It's not for everybody. The question is, if people wanted to have a outdoor space that was really, really easy to manage in terms of you didn't need any plant knowledge, therefore plants just didn't feature in it or barely at all. So it was more hard landscaping, outdoor kitchen, outdoor furniture, that kind of thing. Whose job is it to design and oversee the installation of that? Could that be the job of an interior designer?
Well, that's that. So you're talking about designing a garden that isn't really a garden. It's just an extension of the interior space, hard surfaces, furniture, and outdoor structures. I mean, that is a architect's / interior designer's job, isn't it? But is that going against the grain of what a garden should be like?
I think it's about 10% of the UK's land surface is gardens. So if everybody decided to have these outdoor rooms, all of a sudden our wildlife is really in trouble, because there aren't many refuges for wildlife outside of gardens nowadays anyway, because we insist on tidying everything and building on it all. Or farming it in a way that's not friendly to wildlife. So, the future of gardens is that they have to be havens for wildlife. There is just no way around this, the way we are going as a civilization. So if the only kind of opportunity you have to make a difference to supporting all life is to do it in your back garden, then really the responsibility, sadly, is going to be on everyone to do that. So outdoor rooms are fashionable at the moment, but going forwards, I don't think they're going to be a viable option, or they shouldn't be a viable option, really.
If it's the only element, I was just saying earlier about the ideas we have to do something like this in our back garden. And actually, so you think there's a sort of moral responsibility to be more sustainable and environmentally supportive of nature, if you like, and creating a diverse habitat that supports plants and animals, as well as, facilitating our desire to sit in a nice comfy chair in the warmth outside.
Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going to come from government or industry or local authorities. So really the last bastion of kind of hope, I think, for wildlife really is us. And if we can't get our acts together and encourage it, then that, sadly, I think probably we are not really for this planet for very long. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I think probably that is the way it's going.
Yeah. What sort of things can we do then in the garden to encourage that way of thinking?
I mean, nobody likes to be preached at, so I have to really try and rein myself in when I want to jump up and down and say, get rid of your lawn. I think education. I think people really need to educate themselves about the ramifications of what they are doing. And it's so easy to do bad things in your garden. I have done it myself. I continue to do it now. I'm sure there'll be things that I'm doing now that in a couple of years I will discover, or I will realise actually weren't the best thing. So I think what I would say most importantly is to exercise caution. So if you have a tree in your garden and you're not sure whether you like it or not, just live with it for now. I mean, I think our instinct is to rip everything out and start again from scratch, but sometimes we just need to be a bit softly. There are so many things living in trees and hedgerows and grass and all the rest of it, and even in piles of leaf litter that lurk behind your rubbish bin. You know, if we are so clean and tidy and quick to rip stuff out, quite often we're destroying things without even realising. So I would say that's really important, is just to kind of sit on your hands for a bit, just see what's happening, and try and be careful, just be low impact, which is, as I said, what I kind of design, that's my design ethic really. Just go carefully, just tread carefully, because even the experts at the moment don't really know the damage that we're causing. So I think that, you know, the more we can take a softly approach, the better.
And you mentioned about getting rid of lawns. What's the issue there in terms of, I suppose it's a fairly niche bit of habitat, isn't it? There's not much going on in a lawn.
Yeah. I mean, you'll get birds that come down and peck out grubs from the lawn, but otherwise it's fairly useless in terms of habitat. Obviously not adding to biodiversity. If you water it, if you feed it, then you're causing potential pollution through nitrogen runoff, and you're using water unnecessarily. If you mow it with a petrol mower, obviously that's not ideal. And there's lots of other things that you could have in its place that you can still walk on that are just more beneficial for wildlife, and for us even, you know.
I was listening to the podcast on the tapestry lawn, which was really fascinating in the sense that it was a totally different way of greening your garden, and almost contrary to our natural instincts, made up of small flowers which you'd end up walking on and cutting, but that in itself creates a much more diverse habitat. It's getting an understanding of what's possible, I suppose, and I think that's the great thing about the podcast that I came across after we first connected, that you are lifting the lid on lots of different topics and speaking to lots of experts in the field. But what was the idea behind the podcast? What was the trigger that got you going on that?
I think my trigger was lots of listening to Gardener's Question Time on Radio 4, lots of recordings of that, and also probably my local radio, and reading gardening magazines and watching gardening programmes. Traditional gardening media propagates a lot of rubbish, and they don't talk about alternatives a lot of the time, or they certainly didn't when I started the podcast. And they give advice that's just repeated. It's kind of stuff that people haven't done themselves. It's just something they've read in a book, and they're trotting it out as advice, without actually examining the consequences of what they're doing or having done it themselves. So it was really just a kind of, I suppose, a backlash against traditional garden media. I mean, how about you? What provoked you?
Well, I wanted to sort of share knowledge, really. I guess that was the thing. And as I'm a designer, also an educator, so I teach students, and I just thought there's areas of design that you don't really know about until you get into it, and hearing about how people operate and how they fit into the design world seemed like a really good way of helping students understand, the route that they're going through. But also, for lots of professionals, young and old, it's because I thought it was all aimed at younger, emerging designers, but just understanding about another part of the industry is really useful, even at my age, and I've been designing for years, but talking to some of the specialists I've had on just opens your eyes to how they fit into the industry, and getting a feel for who's involved, on a project, and what their expertise is, and why it's important to involve people as well. So that's how it sort of evolved, and I've been sort of spreading out and catching more people. But yeah, sharing knowledge, I guess. I've not got so much. I didn't realise the the Gardener's World kind of, and those, I mean, I just worship those programs, but now I have to take them with a pinch of salt by the sounds of it. But yeah, I'm not sure how whether that sort of thing is the same in the industry, in interiors industry. I mean, I know there's lots of advice, magazines with advice and tips and stuff, and I didn't really want to get bogged down into, how to create a mid-century modern room, but dig into more of the background of why we're doing it, why it's important, what the skills are, and some of the tips and tricks that might be useful, or, who to go to for what, so it's, I think I've probably got a quite cynical view on the mass market media as well, in terms of, what the latest trends are. I mean, I've never really followed trends, and, it's a part of a marketing thing, isn't it? But they are quite useful in some respects, if only to give people the inspiration as to what they want to try and emulate. But it's getting into the background of why we're doing it and the processes that was really inspiring me to reach out to people.
I think that's excellent. And again, it is similar to what I found, which is same old thing, like 5 shrubs that will give your garden winter colour. How many times can you read an article on that? Then there is so much more to gardening and obviously to interior design, and I think it deserves to be examined. So sometimes I have to stop myself disappearing up my own backside, because I can get quite intellectual about the genre of gardening and garden design, because it's fascinating, and like you say, it fits in with so much overlap with other professions, and it really does deserve to be examined and questioned as well. I mean, in gardening, it's such a traditionally, upper middle class white pursuit in Britain, and that's only a fraction of gardening across the world. So I hope, in a way, as well, without wanting to sound too worthy, I hope that I'm kind of shedding a light on people who are doing things that wouldn't necessarily get exposure. So I think, like you're speaking to people with something to say that maybe wouldn't be heard through the traditional media.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think the way in which you've structured your podcast is great, because it really focusing on real little areas of expertise in terms of approaches. And, although I do think actually I could quite do with that list of 5 plants to bring winter colour to my garden that's been decimated by the tortoises. Tortoise-friendly garden would be useful. Tips on that. But I think it's important to just celebrate the thinking that goes into things like that. You talk about it being, conceptual and worthy of deep thought. It's not just a frivolous exercise, is it? Really, I think there's an opportunity to in both interiors and garden design to have quite sort of complex concepts going on and really revel in that.
Definitely.
So how did you get into gardening? What was the thing that got you interested?
I was working in London, and I was very kind of in an unhappy place, and I think that one day I just had a breakdown, and I said to my partner at the time, I cannot do this anymore. I'm gonna end up dead. I can't do this. And so he said to me, "What do you like doing?" And I just was like in floods of tears, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know, gardening." And he went, "Well, do gardening then." And I thought, do you know what? Actually, it's that easy, isn't it? Do gardening, fine. Why not? So I just spent the last maybe year or so in London, studying via correspondence, studying horticulture, and then I moved out of London, and then I got jobs volunteering, and then I kind of progressed beyond the volunteering to doing actual paid maintenance work, so maintaining people's gardens. And then I decided that it would be nice to do garden design, so I went to the London College of Garden Design, and then after that I carried on doing design, obviously podcasting. I now work one day a week for a horticultural charity for military veterans, and I've got lots of irons in the fire, but everything is horticulture. I just live and breathe it, and I love it. Whether I would have loved it had I done it from school, probably not. I think that's quite often the way. But how about you with interiors? Has it been what you've always done?
Well, it has evolved over time. I studied furniture design. I've always been on that becoming a designer route right from school, like on a conveyor belt through foundation course, and I got into a furniture design course, and slightly by accident I applied for an interior design course and didn't get in, and I sort of managed to wangle my way onto a furniture design course, and actually that proved to be much more related to what I was interested in terms of scale and objects. I left college and couldn't get a design job, so I ended up selling furniture, and then I went back and did a postgraduate in furniture again. And then after that, I just started making furniture for people and started making more bits of furniture to create their spaces. Sort of evolved like that. And I haven't got any dramatic story like you, that you're on the edge of the abyss and furniture pulled me back, sadly. But I'm pleased gardening did that for you. It's a well-known, gardening is a well-known kind of therapeutic exercise, isn't it? That's and
Yeah.
you know, natural spaces do contribute well to your sense of well-being. Is that something you try and pull through into your design work at all, or is that just a natural consequence of the process?
It is a natural consequence. Yeah, it is definitely. I think part of, if I was going to try and encourage people to engage with their outdoor space more, it would be during the design process, when I try and involve them and try and get their buy-in to the end result. So I guess it's more about just explaining why I'm doing what I'm doing, what it's going to look like in the future, and how they can get involved with managing it. You know, just little things like, you know, I might go and point out that there's a particular bird nesting in their rose bush, or I might say, have you seen this butterfly that you've got? And it's just trying to, you know, or this plant does this at this time, or if you touch this plant, it will react to you in some sort of way. You know, I don't know, I'm thinking about the obedient plant. So if you just touch it, it'll bend over, it'll kind of bend shy away from your touch. Just little things like that give people just a curiosity to then hopefully springboard off into exploring, you know, on their own. I must ask you this question. If you go to design an interior space and the garden is absolutely hideous, can you work with that? What can you do?
Do you mean with the space or with the garden, or
with the eyesore in the background?
I just avert my eyes and carry on. I think that's the thing, is that it's like a boundary line of responsibility that interior designers are programmed to just respect, I think. And however, I think the question is about, you know, what do you want to achieve between the two spaces? But my expertise isn't really in garden design, so I probably wouldn't necessarily try and develop an idea unless there was something obvious I could go for. But I think it's about the discussion about how they want to relate to the garden, which is something one can talk about. So that the client I mentioned earlier, who's moving her living space downstairs, I looked out in the garden. It was pretty kind of like barren and, you know, messed up sort of ugliness, just through neglect, really. And she said, I want to get the garden going, you know. And so I'm thinking, yeah, that's fair enough. I can see that. I suppose my job is to facilitate the space so that it links with the garden effectively, and then we may end up having a discussion about what do you want to do in the garden. But I would think it's like it's setting it up really so that they can then take that on themselves. I certainly wouldn't shy away from a project like that, although I suppose I wonder whether there's anything about someone who has an untidy garden. Can you read anything into their psychology, or should one avoid untidy gardeners in life? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm only thinking of myself as an example. My garden is a shocking eyesore, but I love it because it's for the life, really. So although sometimes it does grate a little bit, I have to just go with it for the sake of everything that uses the garden. So other people, and because of that, I love it. Other people might come and go, oh my God, like this garden is such a mess. And yet my interior is like really opulent. And I suppose there is a tie in there. There is the tie that, you know, there's a sort of richness, but it's also quite pared back. I like my interior to be quite clean and uncluttered. So my two aesthetics, indoors and outdoors, are utterly different. So I don't suppose you can read anything into it if I'm anything to go by. Then maybe I'm just a special case. I don't know. You could make a virtue of the juxtaposition between the absolute chaos outside and a really clean minimalist interior.
I mean, I think that's one of the conceptual things we might think about, contrast, you know, inside and outside. You can either go for full contrast or, you know, or full coherence. But again, from my perspective, I'm generally dealing with the interior. So looking outside it wouldn't put me off necessarily. Maybe does it work the other way around? You might get put off by the interior design style of your client and think I'm never gonna work this one.
It definitely does. We interviewed, so Claire and I had a Zoom meeting with a client, and I had to ask, and I said, that wall behind you, did you put that in? And they went, no, don't worry, this is like a room that we inherited, we're going to do it up. Because I just looked at it and kind of paled and went, oh my God, that's so awful. I don't know if I can kind of, you know, if I can work with that. I mean, I would have done. I wouldn't have been that judgy, but sometimes I do get a little bit scared by people's interiors and wonder quite how it's going to pan out. But I think I am hopeless with interior design. I kind of know what I like, and maybe I might occasionally buy a magazine. Dipping into it, it looks as if everything at the moment is an incredibly eclectic mix. So I'm guessing there's the freedom, certainly. I would say people should have a garden that they like. So it doesn't matter if you think it's naff. You know, if you're buying Gardens Illustrated, what you're getting there is a lot of country houses with big gardens, and they all look the same. So don't think that is how gardens should look. Gardens should look how you want them to look. And what I would say is a really good tip for people, if they do have a strong idea about how they want their outdoor space to be, and say they do want an outdoor room, have it in the area nearest your house, or as you said, put it in another part of the garden, maybe at the end where the sun goes at the end of the day. And then the other bits of the garden, don't be too prescriptive. So I would say concentrate on the sort of space around your house or where you're going to sit or be, and then everything else, just let it go a little bit more. We don't have to manicure every last square inch, and try and explore what it is that in a garden that makes you happy and emotionally connects with you, rather than saying, okay, well, I've seen that in whatever you're reading at the time, and trying to impose that on your space. I think gardens, we need to be, and we will become, much more personal in our interpretation of our outdoor spaces. And I think that can only be a good thing going forward.
I'd like to thank Sarah for taking the time to talk to me. It's really interesting to see her perspective on how the design of gardens fits into the scheduling and programming of interior and architecture projects and the challenges around that. Her no-nonsense approach to designing is really refreshing. And the Roots and All podcast, there's some links in the podcast notes. It's got a wealth of information to help both novice and experienced gardeners learn more about the process, techniques and ideas. It's interesting to see the parallels in methodologies between her approach to garden design and those that we use in the interior design world. On her website there's some links to garden courses which you may want to have a look at if you want to extend your knowledge, if you want to learn how to be a kick-ass interior designer. We've got links on the podcast notes to the BA Honours course in interior design at the University of Plymouth. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast. Kay Hansen for her planning support and co-hosting for these and our educational podcasts for the University of Plymouth. And Mark Frith for the music. Really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Leave a comment or get in touch via the website or Instagram. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.